Hey everyone, Mr. Weinland here. Going to be talking about new patterns of trade. It is section 3 of chapter 16. We are almost done with the chapter. It's hard to believe. But we're going to kind of go into the different types of trade that was going on during this time, during the age of exploration. Now we have to understand that the age of exploration wasn't just about, hey, look at me, I found this cool place. It was really about trying to determine what can we do as far as with the land that we find. Obviously, with the contact between Europe and Americas, there's a big, large scale. But we see with Christopher Columbus, after that followed with the interaction with the Native Americans of those places, or those natives of those places, we start to see some sweeping changes by these countries as they're going in and making contact in their arrival. They are not just there to be friends, they're also there to kind of establish a colony, establish an economic system. And so we see this new exchange happen, some good, some bad, but the exchange did lead to new plants being discovered or being passed into the new world. Same with animals and sadly disease. And this is known as the Columbian Exchange that occurred. And here's the thing about it is that a lot of these new goods are introduced and even disease because of the isolation between the two. Because remember, you got the Atlantic Ocean that separated North America and and um, and also South America from Europe and other parts of the world. So right here, so this became a bit of an issue when we see that when they finally the new world and the old world kind of come together, we do see some good things, some things exchange. We see plants, animals being shared between the two hemispheres. So we're seeing the Europeans. They didn't have potatoes. They didn't have corn. They didn't have sweet potatoes or turkeys. These were new world type things. Then you look at the people in the Americas. They didn't have coffee. They didn't have oranges. They didn't have rice, wheat, sheep, cattle, and eventually tobacco is going to be introduced into certain parts of the new world. So this is a big deal as well. And so we're seeing this new exchange of foods, and it's leading to us sharing certain discoveries. We start to see that this is going to change not only Europe, but America as well. We see that these previously unknown foods are then taken back to Europe and shared, and then they're basically like, hey, we want more of those foods, or can we grow them here? If not, let's grow them there in the Americas. And that's partly true because some of the crops that we were growing in Europe or certain parts of Asia, they needed a certain type of temperature, and so or climate. And so they had to be developed or grown in the Americas. So we start to see also too the reintroduction of the horse in the Americas. Had it gone extinct for one point in time, but then it reintroduced thanks to the Europeans. And so this is going to open the doors for transportation in Americas as well. So it wasn't just food. And we can see here in this little map here, you can see what was introduced from Europe, Africa, and Asia. You see cattle, chickens, donkeys, goats, horses, house cats, mice, rats. That's the bad thing. The mice and the rats did carry a lot of disease. Pigs, rabbits, sheep, plants. You had bananas, circus fruits, or citrus fruits. Sorry, not circus fruits. Black pepper, garlic and onions, lettuce, peaches, sugar, disease, sadly, cholera, influenza, malaria, measles, smallpox. You look over what the Americas introduced. Guinea pigs, llamas, turkeys, not so much animals to that of Europe, but a lot of these new foods like beans, avocados, cashews, chili peppers, chocolate, came from the Americas, corn, papayas, peanuts, pecans, potatoes, rubber, yes, rubber, squash, strawberries, sweet potatoes, tobacco from certain parts of North America. Not exactly everywhere, though. And vanilla. We do not see one thing, one category in the Americas that is disease. Now, remember, a lot of that disease that we're talking about, these were big ones, and they ultimately, the people from the Americas were not immune to them. We do see the exchange of foods and animals make a dramatic impact in societies. We see that eventually these are become these things that came from the Americas are going to become a big staple into the European diet. We're going to see this is going to provide some new nutrition. This is going to help people live a little bit longer because they're starting to eat better foods, better quality foods, and so this is opening the door for that. But we are seeing that this Columbian Exchange is going to help with the economics or gastronomics. We do see that activities like the Texas cattle ranching, Brazilian coffee growing not possible without the Columbian Exchange. You couldn't do this or make this happen without the ability to come and find these new things or introduce these new things. Cows, coffee, native to the old world, are now a part of the new world. And so you're starting to see this happen in the Columbian Exchange. Um, and you see that like for example like the Italian food that we know today was a little bit different than what was happened before tomatoes. Think about it. What would Italian be like? What was Italian like with Italian food without tomatoes? So the sauces were different. um, and so with the marinara sauce now, thanks to the tomato, it's going to change things. So until contact with the Americas, Europeans had really never tried tomatoes, and we see Europeans thought tomatoes as poisonous. But by the late 1600s, we see they become a big part again. Like I said, the Italian cookbooks. Now, listen, the Columbian Exchange felt not only in Europe but also in the Americas. Uh, we see that China also saw that this was a lot more nutritious food come their way. Corn, which is, by the way, not the most nutritious food, doesn't digest well. But anyway, and I don't think it has any nutritional value, but it tastes good, and it came to China. So also, we see silver also was being mined in the Americas, coming to China. In Africa, we see two native crops, excuse me, the corn peanuts being grown in Africa. Here's your answer to number 20. So your answer number 20. Scholars estimate how much of all the foods crops around the world today are American origin. And the answer is right there. About one third of all food crops grown in the world came from America. So that's what they believe to have been. And so that is a big, huge deal that America has a big part in the food production and the change in the food production. Now, like I said, new diseases were introduced to natives. Sadly, the smallpox, the measles, the influenza, malaria, killing millions. Very disastrous, killing many populations of natives, and we had seen that a lot of these things had hit Europe and killed a lot of people. But eventually, it would they were immune to it, but they were also asymptomatic. They were able to carry some of these diseases and still spread them. And sadly, we see that this eventually wiped out a lot of places. Like one half of the population of Santo Domingo was wiped out. Population of central Mexico may have decreased by more than 30% in 10 years. So we saw millions upon millions of people, a lot of cultures devastated. We see native populations continue to decline with certain epidemics. Were devastating. The Inca Empire decreased from 13 million in 1492 to 2 million in 1600. And again, part of that was also because of conflict, but the disease was far more devastating than the conflict. North America population fell from 2 million in 1492 to 500,000 in 1900. But disease, like I said, not the only factor in decrease of population. Violence did play a part in that, but disease was a lot more. New economic policy, founding of colonies, brings new goods in Europe, led significant changes. We start to see what is called mercantilism grow in not only in Europe but other parts of the world. We see nations strength to depend on its wealth. Wealthy nations had the power for military and expanded influence, and that's going to play a part in the economy changing and growing. We see some big competition happen because of the search for things like gold and silver. We see merchants believe that there was fixed amount of wealth in the world. we do see for one nation to become wealthier and more powerful than the other, they had to take their wealth from other nations. And so we do see this competition happening as they are going and trying to colonize as fast as they can, create these empires, the ability to do that. Very difficult. We do see that we do see a balance, a bit of a balance of trade. We see that this was put in place to kind of help with the mining, extracting some of these goods, selling them off, creating a little bit more of a balance of trade that would be fair to everyone or favorable to their country. We see that this was helpful. Certain countries receive more gold, silver from other nations, and than it paid to them. Increased its power, weakening foreign competitors. That was the idea. We do see that favorable balance of trade became a central goal to many countries. Now, there was a lot of imports, many imports. We do see with the balance of trade, this reduced the amount of imports by placing tariffs on goods. The idea was we don't need to be importing stuff anymore, or exporting or importing stuff. We don't need to get this stuff. We want to establish our own colonies where that already have these resources. We mine them, and then we don't have to go to other countries for these things. So we see that the tariffs added a cost to the price of the good. So certain imported goods were more expensive and discouraged people from buying and really moving toward a different form of product. So this became a bit of an issue. We see a little bit encouraged more exports that could sell for higher prices than raw materials. Countries encouraged manufacturing exports of manufactured goods. Governments provided also subsidies. We start to see the governments invest in manufacturing of these certain resources. We see most of the resources were, third approach for the favorable balance of trade was controlling resources. So obviously, we see that we see that imports was a big part of that. Trying not to import as much, exporting as much as you can, and then, but most importantly, in order to export a lot, you had to control these resources. So nation controlled own resources, not need to import as much. Why? Because you don't need to spend any money to obtain raw materials. You own them, they were a part of yours. Foreign countries considered rivals might become active enemies, so cut off supply of raw materials. You also want to make sure that you control the gold market or you control the silver market, and so that hurts other rival countries. European nations worked to become more self-sufficient. Nations began to establish their colonies as well. And colonies were important. This is why they needed to establish these colonies. They wanted control of resources, raw materials, provide new markets for manufactured goods. These help their merchants as much as possible. And you see this strategy not just happen during the Age of Exploration. It also happened right around World War II. You see this happen with Japan. They got to a point where they were needing more raw resources or raw material. They were running out of it, running low of it. They didn't have certain things. In order to do that, they conquered parts of China, and we see them had done that even since World War II. So it's not a new idea now. We see less of that happening, but it was a big deal during the time of World War II. But most of this started with the Age of Exploration. Your answer number 19 is we see, were colonies in the Americas allowed to sell raw materials to countries other than their home country? We see a lot of monarchs restricted the economic activities of their colonies. They did not want to have to sell to other countries. They wanted them to sell within their own country, keep that money within the empire or the monarchy or the government. So colonists could not sell raw materials to other countries. So that is your answer to number 19. No is the easy way to write that. No. They could not buy manufactured goods from other nations. Very strict laws forbidding them from doing that, and forced to buy only from home country. So this became a bit of a problem, especially in the Oklahoma. I'm sorry, not the Oklahoma colonies. Sorry, the American colonies, because they were restricted on what tea they could buy and certain other products. We see this plays a big part in society. We see this changes colonization. This puts a big impact on certain societies, towns, cities, growing with business activity. This is preventing certain individuals from getting too wealthy. It also really welled the power in their towns. So Certain merchants had probably more power than that of the business owner, and that became a bit of a problem, and became an issue. Impact of rural life, impact of colonization, not felt throughout the society as much. We see that they were able to still take care of themselves, not have to worry so much about some of these things. But we see as generations pass, they become a little bit more dependent on the foods from the Americas, and but we do see a lot of the rural life remained poor, and in some ways still is struggling in Americas and other parts of the world. But we do see with the increase in trade, and we see with the colonization, this is bringing a new light to a new idea called capitalism, which we have seen being practiced even today. This plays a big part in Europe, but also in America. As this expands throughout much of Europe in capitalism, we see that this is most economic activity carried on by private individuals trying to seek a profit. It's not just for the government, it's for individuals to be able to gain something out of the business. We see that individuals amass great trade fortunes, merchants supplied colonists with European goods, returned products, raw materials. So this is going to see through the trade. We see that increased business activities with trade is causing a lot of merchants to get rich with that wealth. We see them investing in other business ventures because it's like, hey, my main business really is being a merchant, but I have this extra money, and my friend Tom is now wanting to start a printing press, or my friend Bill is, trying to create new products for other businesses or other things. So they're investing, kind of like you see today, like with a lot of major companies. How do they get started? Because they go to investors, they go to individuals with money who are willing to pay for a certain stock. It's like Shark Tank. you know it's like Mark Cuban, when he's on there, he's wanting to use some of his money to invest in a company, to, well, one, to see that company do well and be successful, but also he wants to improve his portfolio, make it a little bit stronger, a little bit more powerful. He wants a little bit more piece of the pie and have a little bit more funds so he can use it for other investments. So that's kind of the idea with Mark Cuban. The idea is, I mean, and part of it, yeah, is they want to make more money, but also part of it is business. They love business. They want to invest, and this is what happens back then: is that they have this money. It's not being used for anything, so why not give it to a friend with a business in hopes that they are successful? Because if they're successful, then it not only helps you, but it helps everybody else in the economy, and it makes things better. So that's kind of the idea of what's happening, and it's still happening today. This does raise prices, though. We do see investors do raise a little bit of some prices because of certain risks with the trade. That's going to cause inflation. With inflation, you have increased prices because you have to pay for the good. And sometimes inflation will fluctuate. It will go down for certain products, but most of the time, certain products will continue to rise, like gasoline, and you're going to see like certain food prices will increase over time. We will see fluctuations during periods of time, like you're seeing now in the coronavirus. Yeah, it's like what, $1.50 a gallon for gas, but that will go up eventually. So it's just kind of the demand for the good, the growing population, the scarcity of the good, how much is out there is causing the higher prices. If you want to pause here, this last point is your answer, number 21, which number 21: during the rise of capitalism, European investors willingly took the risk of investing in overseas trade because, and it's right here, because the demands for goods increased due to growing population, scarcity of goods, raising the demand drove prices higher. So there you go. That last point, if you want to pause to write it down, go right ahead. But money supply is a big deal. We see that money supply is what ultimately pays for goods. So increase in money supply, another factor in high prices as well, because the dollar, if you're printing out more dollars and you don't have enough gold or silver to back it up, then you have to raise the value of that dollar. And that is an issue. And that's why I know a lot of people say, well, why can't we print more money? Because if we print more money, it's going to hurt the dollar. So It's going to change the value of the dollar elsewhere, and not only in the United States, but also in the world. We're going to see less value of that dollar because right now the dollar is a very powerful piece of money right now in other parts of the world. And if we continue to print more money, that's going to hurt the value of it, and we don't want that to happen. So we do see that this can cause some problems. Shiploads of gold, silver flowed into Europe and the Americas to be made into coins. Over time, the increase in money and circulation pushed that price up, which could be a problem. And so we see overseas ventures, often too expensive for individual investors. So we see that sometimes there are certain individuals who did not have enough money to get into a business. Like, oh man, I really love that idea, but I can't risk spending all this money for that. And this is also happens on Shark Tank because there are certain sharks that are like, I really like your business, but I'm not going to pay $25,000 for just 10% of your company. And that's why you see them negotiate. And sometimes with other sharks, they'll say, hey, let's go in together for 30% for 20 or $30,000. And so this is what happens is with joint stock companies, they come together. They're basically investors bought shares of the stock in the company. So this is where we start to see the stock market started to sort of begin. If a company made a profit, each shareholder received a portion. The idea is that how many shares you have, you get a certain amount of that profit. So the profit loss based on number of shares owned. If a company failed, investors lost the amount invested. So there's some risk involved, and it's like the stock market. Again, it can go really high and you can be beneficial, and then go really low, and you feel the hurt, you feel the pain. British East Company, one of the first joint stock companies in the 1600 to import spices from Asia. Others formed to bear the cost of establishing colonies, and we see these sorts of financing kind of continue to spread throughout the colonies and ultimately create what is known as North America and certain other places around the world. So definitely a huge deal with what's going on with the Columbian Exchange. But that's pretty much one aspect of the age of exploration is the increase in trade and the new age of trade. But we're also going to talk about slavery, which is going to be our last PowerPoint presentation for the academic year. So we're going to talk about that soon. So be looking out for that. Again, you can always email me for questions at weinlandp@manford.k12.ok.us. All right. See you guys next time.